Hey, you. Gotta get a little on the close side of the
Not that I say much, but.
All right, how's that? Well, it's a little better. All right, cool. Okay, that's a little bit. Thank you. Jimmy Rocks. I actually have him tagged in a picture as the really cool, awesome panel guy. He is. All right, so we're going to cover eventually here.
Once it downloads.
Multicultural steampunk. Well, if I'm the only one making noises, I mean, they're going to be pretty silly. All right, so we're going to get into this a little bit, but basically what we're covering is what is multicultural steampunk, why does it matter? The effects and influences of imperialism and Orientalism, yes, there's going to be a little bit of history. Cultural integration versus cultural influence, kind of just helping describe the differences. Common issues, misconceptions, and then how, basically throughout all of this, we're going to kind of explain how it all applies to steampunk, diesel punk, any of the various kind of breakdowns there. A little background on myself. My undergraduate degree was anthropology, so cultural things are like, I was actually cultural anthropologist, not so much the physical anthropology. It's cool, but I just like the cultures. My wife and I are currently studying acupuncture, so the whole like Asian thing is just...
Permeates.
Yeah, we're so like, wannabe Asians, it's sad. All right, so... All right, here's the fun part. She's not good. All right, so multicultural steampunk, way distinguishing steampunk from with other cultures from the typical definition of Victorian England and surrounding European countries. It gets inundated with that so much. So why the term multicultural? It's the term that's getting used. So that's kind of it. There's some debate behind using the term. They're pretty valid arguments. Mainly what you're looking at is, the term's used to separate other cultures from Victorian England, so multi except for England. So some people kind of argue that. It's like, hey, well, England barely has culture, so we at least have to include them. Well, it's kind of a throw it in your face idea. You gotta get it up and in there and get it talking about in order for people to start listening and get the movement and idea in there. Eventually, instead of calling it multicultural or even cultural, as I try to do sometimes, we can just call it steampunk, and it won't matter. So the importance of multicultural or cultural steampunk is to expand the idea. Yeah, a lot of the technology behind steampunk came from the industrial age, which, oh hey, Europe and England and all and the US.
And America.
Yeah.
Look at America.
What? Where's that? Who?
You're a bad American.
Oh yeah, sorry, I'm a bad American. Excuse me. So, but here's the thing. Steampunk is a historical fiction with a fictional timeline. So it doesn't really matter if you want to do it, you do it. That's why we do it. And because of that, there's no reason why culture can't develop within some other country involving steampunk, and that kind of level of technology or even beyond. So then, basically you'll hear a term sometimes that gets used for steampunk, or retro-futurism.
I like that term.
Yeah.
It's easier
So
to
that's one, and I'll try to start using it more. I'm really bad about it, but it is a little easier to say, and describes it. Retro-futurism. But everything goes retro, so if you're kind of sick of that idea too, don't use the term. But let's consider some of the principles behind steampunk in its literary foundation. Steampunk started out, Jader kind of doing the definition originally, and they tagged it into Victorian England for their setting. It was
What
their
did you
choice.
define it as?
Essentially, the development, and like I said, his setting for his literature ended up being Victorian England, and some of his, peers and whatnot writing around the same stuff just kept with that.
Specific to Victorian sci-fi definition.
Yeah, you just said it. There you go. Definition. Victorian sci-fi. So one of the things we didn't cover in our Steampunk 101 panel is kind of the idea of proto-steampunk.
Oh yeah.
So we'll kind of mention it here. Nemo, the whole Jules Verne basis, and we love to use Jules Verne, like, oh yeah, Jules Verne, and H.G. Wells. They're not steampunk, they're proto-steampunk. You can't be steampunk before the idea exists. And they're where our ideas came from, for that.
They're the inspiration, not the beginning.
Right. And so Jader's putting that together and taking that inspiration, throwing it back into the setting, where they're talking about social issues. It's a social commentary of sorts, talking about women's rights, despite the movement we had. No, they really haven't changed much. They're still getting difficulties and acceptance with the equality factor, etc. Getting women into certain fields during the 60s, 70s, 80s was still really, really difficult to be accepted. Like scientists, any form of science was still very difficult to actually have a woman in there and be respected.
And paid the same.
And paid the same. So they were using the setting to show how it still existed. It existed back in the Victorian era. Why they chose that era? Good question, but it was a good one to choose because everybody looks good. But it did give them a level of technology to play with after the Industrial Revolution. It also gave them something to stem from with the whole idea of the inventor and that the concept of do-it-yourself kind of aspect, which is what we just went rampant with as far as those who enjoy steampunk. So, in examples for some more literary, you've got the Difference Engine, William Gibson, Bruce Sterling. There's a bunch of anthologies that have a lot of short stories involved with steampunk. Some good ones, kind of refresh back into that social commentary. They'll have like a heroine who's struggling to get that equality and so on.
There was one, was it steampunk? That was more of the proto-steam?
No, it was steampunk. It's steampunk apostrophe G. That one actually had steampunk stories. It was Steampunk Prime.
Oh, that's right.
If that was the name of the anthology.
Yeah,
that one's a lot of proto. The fact that
it was
it's
kind of
steampunk,
more,
the title bothered me, but
little known short stories from maybe some authors that you might recognize.
it was the authors during the speculative fiction time frame actually doing a lot of writing, really cool stuff. And it's proto. It's the stuff that we look at and go, aha, that's where our ideas are coming from.
There's still some really cool stories in it though.
Yeah. So next one. So we got steampunk technology in the world. So let's take a look at some of the origins of commonly referenced technology in steampunk, like clocks. So an escapement, the mechanism that transfers energy to the timekeeping element and enables counting the number of oscillations of the timekeeping element. Yeah, basically it's the tick-tock of your clock, right? So now we can really understand that. Where was it created? First, Greece. But taking it past the water clock of the times, the Chinese implemented escapement devices in their astronomical clock towers around the late 10th century, and still used a water element within it, a liquid element. And then Arabic designers implemented a mercury escapement. Basically a Spanish piece around the late 12th century. So we're looking at global development long before the Victorian era. And later it got turned into a non-liquid based mechanism which we utilize today on a lot of clocks. So then automatons. Well, the first claim as such could be attributed to Al-Jazari during the 13th century. And around even 2600 BC, the Chinese had a clockwork mechanism that we call the south-pointing chariot. Here's what it looks like. The little dude on top always points south, no matter which direction the little chariot portion underneath is traveling. Right? Really, really cool design. Really simple too.
It's kind of interesting that like Westerners always want to point north while Chinese people always want to point south.
There's some cultural aspects behind that, but it has to do with demons, the winds, etc.
Flight element theory.
That's a whole other hour worth of talking, which y'all don't want. Excuse me. So in Japan, they have the karakuri ninyo, which can be translated roughly as puppet. Now, what we have here, some examples. Basically, the right side is the internals of the left one. And this Zashiki karakuri is called a Sahakobi ninyo. It was originally developed in the Edo period in Japan, so around the 1700s. This is the most popular of the household style karakuri. Go ahead and kick over. Got a few links here. Show you some videos as soon as they pull up. We'll actually show the two, and then there's another one. The second one that we're going to show is a Yumihiki Doji, which is an archer that shoots arrows. Now, the internals of these are essentially clockwork mechanisms. These are wound spring, I might stumble on that, or a combination of the two in order to do its performance. Yeah. So there's like a little turn crank, little wind up you do for these, just to kind of start them. But once started, that's when they get really cool. Please wait. Please wait. Yeah, okay, anyways. So I'll describe it a little bit here. So you got this one's a tea service kind of style. He's got his little tray on there, and actually down at the bottom are little feet. So when it's covered, you see the little feet move as it goes. It's kind of cute.
I like how his hairstyle kind of gives him a dog ears or something. Amuses me.
And on the next one, there's a couple little details to that. It wasn't until I watched the video a couple times that I finally noticed, and it just made me go, "Oh, that's so cool!" And the head actually like bobs, kind of like, yeah, you'll see some movement to it. You see the feet kind of shifting back and forth, and then the head.
It bows. It doesn't bob.
Yeah, bows. So the idea behind this is by placing the cup on the tray, a full cup, it will invoke the mechanism, start traveling forward, as we shall see here. And see the little feet moving? That's so cute. So then it takes, it stops. Have your tea, finish, do it back, and it returns. All on its own. Spin around here a bit. Back to where it started. So this next one is the archer. There's some really cool aspects of it. It basically shoots, I think it's what is that, 4 arrows? Yeah. And here's the little detail. Look down on the bottom left. You see the little dude turning the crank? And you never noticed that until a few videos watching it. I was like, oh, that's so cool.
What's also cool about it is once every 10 arrows, it'll intentionally miss the target.
A little randomness here and there designed into it. But otherwise, it's actually pretty accurate. So good, simple examples of some automatons made quite a while ago. Now for some more information on karakuri, or the inventors, including the founder of the Toshiba Corporation, who was one of these guys, you can visit karakuri.info.
Just because I want to, I'm going to show you a brief one.
This one's actually really cool. Basically, it's like the cup game with a single cup, so it's not quite as tricky.
But you have to, I think, keep turning it. It's not quite as automatic as
Yeah. But it wouldn't take much to really change that, I'd say. The ball is there. Or is it? She hides herself from the fan to go. Yes. As you can see, it disappeared. So, pretty cool nifties. Alrighty, and then go website, karakuri.info. There's some really cool stuff on there. Great explanations behind. There's a lot more to karakuri to begin with, so this is one of the areas if you want to have fun. So let's get to Orientalism. Originally, it was basically just a term to simply define the study of the Orient, or the East, and the West was referred to as the Occident. Now, at the time, the East referred to where geographically? Anybody know? Anyone? Not quite. Middle East, what we would know of it today. Basically, sometimes referred to as the Near East. The area from Turkey to Egypt to Iran. Included Persia, the Ottoman Empire, and some of the other Arab nations and empires that existed, developed in that area. Later, the East grew to include India, then China, Japan, Korea, and Southeast Asia. And in 1978, a man named Edward Said made the term Orientalism controversial after he publicized a book by the same name. His book discussed, or essentially helped change the term to how it's used today, which is essentially pointing out the errors of our ways, I'll say. So, kind of a little bit, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the most biased of them all? Yeah, well, the Westerners, it turns out, because of our history. We're just not that great. Said's claim was basically that the two geographical entities, the Occident and Orient, support and to an extent reflect each other. What that means is you can't look at one culture without seeing part of your own culture inside it. It's just impossible to do. As a result, and to show the point, Said used the romanticizing that occurred in literature about the East. Things like Arabian Nights, probably the best example of that. And it actually occurred as far back as even Homer. But again, Arabian Nights probably being your most obvious to that. Just the obvious romanticized. Take a look at the story of Aladdin. It's taking the setting sometimes and applying even the Western style stories. The whole story idea of the poor boy coming up and suddenly becoming famous and rich.
What's kind of interesting about that is actually it was the Middle East who I guess was romanticizing themselves.
Well, that's something we get into. Basically, what happens in imperialism or in Orientalism is that an author starts to reference something as an authority, and the previous author's writings or their own experiences become that authority, and in turn become a reference for other authors as an authority. And then even fictional sources starts to cross the line into the nonfiction as that authority reference. And eventually, what Said was pointing out was that the Orient incorporates these authorities or these descriptions as themselves. So they take on these descriptions. So in steampunk, we make use of a fictional historical timeline. So if we incorporate other cultures into fiction, then we risk orientalizing them. That's why it's so important. We basically have the potential of repeating our own historical mistakes over a not so distant past. And in an attempt to add the component we enjoy, possibly even want to honor, we could offend them. So what we're looking at is just how do we go about doing it without pissing people off. A good example could be like a steampunk geisha.
That always pisses me off.
Yeah. Well, one of the problems is that usually when we see the clothing involved, they'll take like a kimono style, but they'll throw it into something that's more akin to a Wild West tavern girl.
Sexy.
You know, getting the whole up front kind of exposure and everything, and then they go all steampunk with it. Well, I mean, it's cute, and yeah, it's sexy, but you're probably going to piss some people off that like Japan, because it gives an idea, or it associates them a little closer to the prostitute idea, which geisha were not. There were geisha, and there were prostitutes, and there are differences.
The prostitutes noticed how much business the geishas were getting and decided to dress like them, and which is one of the reasons it's so utterly confusing.
It got worse as well in the World War II time frame. Americans came over and started throwing around money, and so the geisha that did exist, those that were struggling, some of them actually went over onto the prostitution side. So that didn't help much either. So imperialism, I think hopefully many of us know what it is, but at least the youngins' education's been kind of going to crap, so sometimes we don't get the greatest explanation. It's essentially an unequal economic, cultural, and territorial relationship based on a domination and subordination. It was the mercantile expansion performed by European countries seeking power, and while it occurred historically, technically it still happens today. Some people argue that our U.S. policing other states kind of idea can be considered part of that. So here's one of those few terms that I'm gonna, it's like, oh, here's some lingo within culture and the studies of for anthropology. It's acculturation. It's essentially the change of a culture and psychology that occurs between two cultures once they enter into a relationship. Now, often a subordinate culture takes on that of the dominant, but sometimes it's mutual, and sometimes it actually happens the other way around. To give you a good idea of this, or an example that people might be familiar with, is England with India. When they put apart their imperialistic, mindset over onto India, there's a lot of stuff that we incorporated from there. The bandana, for example, is actually originally Indian. Paisley, that nice little design, comes from India, and look how much we use it. So there's a lot of influence that comes in. And imperialism kind of forced the process to occur across the globe as the nations, went through expanding to new areas. So why it matters is, again, steampunk's based on some history. And how much history do you include? And this is where we get into the area of, do we sweep the shameful parts under the rug? Or do we include them and acknowledge the occurrences, even acknowledge them as being wrong? And so for those sticking to the idea that steampunk's only Victorian England, first of all, is there anybody? Good, because I was going to ask you, why are you here? So what we're looking at is imperialism is often left out. Partially because it doesn't have a lot of place in the plot lines that people develop off of, or the character development. And then sometimes it's omitted in order to not reflame the issue, to not piss people off. So if you include the other cultures, then we have to consider it. And the question I asked above becomes kind of important. So, imperialism can be seen as a sensitive object and a potential for offending other cultures subjected to it. So just keep it in mind. Yes, and I know, I'm reading, sorry. I'm getting used to this presentation. I changed it.
He did change it, and he could go into countless details and more examples.
Part of the reason why I only put in some of the information, because I could talk about imperialism or Orientalism for hours.
Yeah, but that's why your wife is here to stop you and go, hey, we're running out of time.
Yeah.
But then I don't really feel like you are leaving things out.
Well, so, all right, so cultural integration versus influence. Basically, what we're looking at is integration, that mesh between two or more. The mesh is fairly even, 50-50 kind of thing. Influence is more of just accents of one onto the other. And to give you some examples, yes, this is Miss Anna Pham. In the outfit she's wearing, I'd say it's primarily European. We have a corset. She's got the shirt over there, but basically she's got brocade on the corset. So, oh, maybe there's a little flavoring. And then she's got a nifty fan. So we're seeing just little influence factor here. Compared to her next outfit, Miss Anna Pham again. And basically she's the one that displays integration a lot more. You can see the European dress with a kimono worn open over the dress, and a waist belt, some gloves, and a katana. What you're looking at is there's not a predominant culture really displayed from it, and that's more of an integration. So, do you have to be, we're going to go over some basics here, and the first one is, do you have to be a person from a specific culture to portray that culture? No. It's just like cosplay. You don't have to be Japanese to do a Japanese cosplay. And you don't have to be African descent in order to actually portray like a tribal African. If you're not doing it right, you might piss somebody off, and that's one of the things we have to worry about. But if you've done your research and you're doing a fairly accurate display, then honestly, if anybody questions you and then you start to go off and explain, they're going to be impressed because you did your research. And that's the key thing, is to actually take some time and do a little research behind it. It's kind of like just seeing a really bad cosplay. While Manfei, for example, is not the most pleasant, sight to see, that costume's actually fairly accurate to Faye. Unfortunately, it's just on a guy who's kind of big, and so it's not Faye. So there's some other costuming personas, religious and spiritual figures. Be careful. For example, if you're going as a Catholic priest and steampunking it up, some Catholics, especially the priests, see them, might get a little upset. Granted, they have worse things to worry about right now, probably. But your best bet would be talk to one and tell them what you would like to do and ask them, what could you do to make sure that maybe you're not misportraying?
Like actually think if you want to be in character as to whether or not you want to go watch the burlesque show.
It's true, being a Catholic priest being punked up and going to a burlesque show might throw some people off. And that's one of the things, you've got the little, nice little white collar thing, that they wear, very distinctive kind of aspect to it. Well, that might be one of those times, yeah, just remove it. And that might be something that they point out. It's like, you know what, just don't use that. Because then otherwise you can't quite tell. But if you're going to really do it, then just make sure people understand you're not actually a Catholic priest. So don't sit there trying to do confessionals or anything like that. Demeaning roles is another good example. Chinese rail worker. They weren't exactly, the coolie kind of idea. They weren't exactly treated all well. They were servants. Granted, the Chinese rail workers were paid, but horribly paid, horrible conditions. So if you're going to do it, if you're going to do one like maybe a Chinese rail worker hero or something like that, well, okay, cool, but just be careful that, again, you're not going to piss off somebody who maybe has some long history with a Chinese descent in the U.S. and goes, dude, my great-great-grandfather was a Chinese rail worker. What the hell are you doing? And that's where you have to be like, oh, well, actually, I'm trying to be kind of like a hero too, and helping right the wrongs and blah, 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 the Robin Hood of the Chinese rail workers or something.
Make it convincing.
Yeah, but again, have a good explanation, have some research done. You'll impress a person, and they're going to be a lot less pissed off. So then there's steampunk culture with a lower technology. For example, the Mayan. Steam? What? Aside from, seeing the vapor coming up off of the pot as it's boiling, it wasn't really used as a power source. The technology wasn't really there. And even when you look at it like bronze, some people are like, well, what about like doing Bronze Age kind of steampunk or something like that? Well, it's doable, but again, some of those cultures existing during the time frames didn't even have bronze. It's just a matter of what materials were around in their area. So it's doable. It's a fictional timeline, so no problem. It just means a little more character development. When somebody goes, how do you do that? They didn't have, what do you even do? Hey, I could steampunk an atlotl, which would be cool. The little thing throws like a small spear and goes really, really fast. Well, you could do like a gear-powered kind of one where you don't even have to go, wow, it just goes, and does it on itself. That would be cool.
Kind of a crossbow?
Yeah, not quite. Yeah. Or there you go, take crossbow technology and throw it into the idea of an atlotl with a spear. Who needs a bow? Anyways.
Be careful if you're going to do that as to what con weapons policies are.
Oh, yeah.
That's our disclaimer.
That's always a fun part. And actually, that's a great example too on an area that you have to be careful of. One of the guys that was at Ushicon, they had actually developed out a steampunk samurai of sorts, and they made like a metal tin-based, basically, hat. The problem was they didn't roll the edges, so they were cut tin edges. They can be a little bit sharp on some of the stuff. And so it didn't pass the weapons prop check kind of factor. So again, be careful with what you're doing and how you're doing it because of simple
and
things like
make sure
rules.
that it is not a terrorist weapon like the handy and his wrist-mounted flamethrower, which was really, really cool, except apparently it was considered
It's considered a very restricted
it's a weapon of mass destruction,
yes.
and then he took it across state lines, and he got informed by an off-duty police officer. He's like, you are so lucky that I'm off-duty.
Because really, it doesn't matter if you're off-duty or not. A police officer can bust your ass right down there for that. And so he was nice about it to inform him first. So really, as long as he doesn't hook it up to a fuel source, he's okay.
It's a fancy weapon.
But then what's the fun of that? Yeah, so it's a very fancy lighter with an extremely long potential to light your cigarette. Yeah.
Okay.
So on the left side we've got Radha, who's actually in the left picture, but on the right side of it. Or actually, yeah, that's right. And she's in an Indian steampunk outfit. On the right, we have Bones Jangle, one of the musicians within the steampunk, movement. This is like his full getup. You don't always see him in the makeup setup and everything with it, but the rest of the outfit usually do. And so, looking at it, it's kind of a voodoo pirate mixture. See, I love when Anna is actually around for these because it gets to embarrass her. She's part of Airship Constantine, which is out of San Antonio. So on the left, or actually currently the only picture. We have Kit Stolen in a wonderful, fabulous outfit, very Victorian style, kind of almost Victorian goth. The hair is not his own, it is not dreads, it is actually, I forget what he used, I think it's like leather and a bunch of other stuff. It's practically a headdress, almost wig type thing that he puts on.
His hair is like this long.
Yeah, it's not very long at all. If you Google steampunk boy or steampunk guy, you will come up with this picture. And
Even if you
the
just
top
Google
hits.
steampunk.
True, actually, steampunk, he comes up still. Yeah, actually, I think this picture was even used in the Steampunk Bible, one of the recent publications, kind of helping explain steampunk. And so you've got Asian descent wearing Western clothing and whatnot. Now, what's stolen his attention off camera?
Bum, bum, bum.
Yes, Miss Anna. So again, back in that outfit where you're seeing that nice fusion of, between the two.
Move on.
Oh yeah. So on this one, we got the two gentlemen. The one on
Left.
the left is an actual Native American in a Wild West steampunk outfit. The one on the right, not a Native American, but wearing a Native American steampunk outfit. So you kind of see a nice juxtaposition there. See how it's done both ways. Now, we've seen some examples of the culturally inspired outfits, often using clothing and fabric sort of, mixed, into another. This next one is a great example of using a design pattern of a cultural outfit, but absolutely no materials that are culturally specific. The outfit she's wearing is made entirely out of metal. There's actually, I think, a little bit of a hard drive or circuit board kind of, aspect thrown into there. What looks like kind of could be bone, they're not. There's metal tubes going across. Now you could take this and replace some of that with like, the synthetic bones and stuff like that to give a little more of a historical referencing, going back to kind of a cultural specific material of sorts. But the idea, you see the cut and everything, kind of the loincloth look and all, very Native American look behind it. And this next one,
You didn't take that one out.
No, I didn't actually take that out.
Yes, you did.
No, I did.
Yes, you did.
So there was one that was really cool. It was an older Native American gentleman wearing this like full, the outfit has like the obvious Native American styling with that big headdress feather look and all, but it was made out of, again, metal circuit board sitting on his chest for the piece there.
Therefore, I argue it's more cyberpunk.
Yeah, it is almost kind of cyberpunk. And there's like cut up CDs at the ends of what would be the feathering and all.
There isn't really an aesthetic movement for the cyberpunk, so it kind of gets tossed in there.
Yeah, there's even, we recently saw an article talking about like, the definition of steampunk, and they mixed in this little reference that I thought was completely cyberpunk. They used Neil Stephenson's A Diamond Age as a reference for steampunk. And I went, what? No. Yeah. So, let's see, what's the next one? Yes. This is a collection of Steampunk Mexico Forum, a group of them that were able to attend Chronopia, which is a steampunk event that happens in Guadalajara. As you can see, most of the outfits there kind of have that typical higher Spaniard-based descent for the region. It would be really cool to see something a little more mariachi or even a little more Mayan influenced, and eventually we'll see some of that. We have a bunch of people in the Austin area who are interested in Mexican steampunk. And there's actually some events that are going to be going on soon as well, down closer to the border. Omnicon, I believe it is one of the ones that's down in McAllen.
Yeah, just down in the valley.
Really, yeah, they are
Like
pretty much
6
the valley.
hours from here.
And then there's also Kingsville. They're trying to actually start up a steampunk-based convention there out of the Texas A&M Extension campus that's over there. So you will hopefully see some really cool Mexican stuff coming out of there, and I can't wait to see some pictures. All right, this next one is a Persian steampunk outfit designed by and worn by Miss Kagashi, who is the writer behind Multiculturalism for Steampunk at thesteamerstrunk.blogspot.com. Probably, aside from Beyond Victoriana, one of the more known blogging sites about multicultural steampunk. Hopefully, you will soon be replacing those. But that's just because we're getting that stuff started. So, it's a great outfit, as you can see. You don't have to go sexy, and you still look absolutely fantastic. She looks wonderful in this, and it has the obvious Persian look to it. And you can still see the steampunk behind it. This next outfit is designed by a man named Art Sink up on DeviantArt. That's his username. It's basically what he calls a Scottish African tribe mix. You can see kind of a little bit of the design in there. Unfortunately, the picture crops up a little too much on the bottom, so you don't quite see as much of the Scottish influence behind it, but it's there. The skirting is more akin to a kilt, even though it does drape a little bit. There's another picture that kind of shows it more, but it doesn't really show the rest of the outfit. So this was kind of the best one to work with. These next two pieces are from another gentleman on DeviantArt, Agnolo99. These are kind of a steampunk African tribal sculpture. These are actually part of a series that he's been creating called Industrialized Africa. And as you can see, it's not quite the slap a year on it kind of idea that some people remark about, but just wonderful sculpture ideas, and you can see the obvious African design and influence behind it. Now, anybody who's actually read the Steampunk Bible, for example, and some people may have just seen this gentleman's art before. This is by James Eng. Probably his most commonly referenced one. It's actually on the inside cover art for the Steampunk Bible. The front one shows a more black and white design schematic, while the back one shows the rest of this. Just beautiful, beautiful design behind it. And then there's a few more of his art. Nice little band kind of performing, a little automaton kind of setup. This one, I love this one. It's kind of like a Night Watchman guy, but it's run by kitties. Look at the one up in the top skull. Kind of like they're in a tank controlling it. It's great. On the left one, you have a large steampunk emperor throne. I mean, it looks like it could move and float around on its own the way this thing is situated. And then on the right side, you've got a gentleman and his automaton serving him, but he's in a very, very geared out wheelchair.
The wheelchair reminds me of Wild Wild West.
Yeah, the wheelchair in Wild Wild West. There's actually a gentleman who did create a steampunked out wheelchair. It's in one of the steampunk museums as part of the collection. But you can see all the wonderful contraptions behind it. It's great. The man's art style, his art style is just absolutely fantastic. Here are some of the members of Airship Constantine in their steampunk Dia de los Muertos outfits. This actually happened recently. They had done a photo shoot beforehand, and then we met them up for one of the celebrations and all. Here's a little more up close where you can see the makeup and top hats with goggles on their head.
Yes. Mexican? Not Mexican.
Yeah, that's the other fun part. That's us. This is actually a Dickens on the strand. Throwing in, actually my outfit really is a combination. I've got Japanese hakama on. I'm wearing a shirt that is kind of along the Indian tie, lines, wearing a Western, a leather vest, and my fox kitsune mask. My fox spirit. And my batik, Indonesian batik bandana. So, these are some examples of how it can be done, but there's plenty more ways to do it, and we love seeing it. Ooh, cool, makeshift time. So one of the things I'd like to be able to do with you guys is definitely some Q&A. You know, if you have questions on how to go about doing something, where to go about getting stuff. I think one of the, let me point this out, one of the questions I was asked recently was research. Like, how do you do the research for some of this? How do you get some of this information, especially on other cultures?
School libraries.
Yeah, hit up your libraries, and honestly hit up like public libraries, big city public libraries. Talk to the reference librarians and tell them what you're looking for. A lot of times they may have access to some of the electronic resources, which will give you access to academic works, like ethnographies that have been done, whether from master's and doctoral students, or other published ones. You can also find them in a lot of the bookstores. I know Half Price and some of the used bookstores usually have a section kind of for anthropology. If you look through those, you can find all sorts of books about. Now keep in mind, they're written by anthropologists. So again, there's that.
Dry and boring.
They are sometimes dry and boring, but you're looking at a perspective of an outsider trying to look at it inside to a group. Sometimes you get them feeding you a little bit of an inside perspective. Some anthropologists like to make use of people within the culture they're studying to help describe their culture as well, by giving them cameras and just letting them take pictures of stuff that they want and kind of seeing what they do. So that's one area you can do it. Be careful on your references. You can always go with historical references in the writings. You can also look at fictional, such as some of the artwork and illustrations, but that's where you need to be careful about it because of the whole authority factor. Use it for a reference and then find out as much about it as you can, and then go from there. So, questions? Anyone? Yeah, dude.
So, the main focus of the whole thing is that multicultural steampunk is non-Victorian England steampunk.
For now.
For now. One thing I didn't see you touch on much was what about the other Western steampunk, which is the Old West?
Right. Wild West is actually a culture. That's true. And it's actually one of the things when I get into, we have an advanced panel on this that we started doing where we actually talk about a few specific cultures. And like Native American, when I start talking about that, a lot of times I'll pull in the Wild West influence as well to that. Wild West is definitely distinctive, and part of it is even on the aesthetic factor, the clothing that you see is very different. While it might have an attempt to look fancy, the materials are often much more sturdy, hardy materials. There's not as much color thrown into it because you're in the dirt, you're in the grime a lot of times. And so if you see color, then it tends to be for the bankers and railroad tycoon kind of style characters.
Also, if you're kind of more pioneer, there's actually a pioneer reenactment thing in Austin, which is really nifty. And if you look at old pictures of theirs, they dress like Victorian England people.
And there's also
So
the
it kind of
influence
depends on your profession
Yeah.
and how much dirt and grime you're going to be involved with and how much travel and all that good jazz.
Now, when you look towards the references, fortunately, we do have a lot of movies to kind of work from. One of the cool things about movies is that whoever's doing costume design, they're usually really anal about trying to get it as accurate as possible. So you do tend to get some fairly period-based references.
Except for their portrayals of Native Americans.
Except for when they do that. But, so you have a lot of references to work with, but it is definitely a distinctive culture. And I usually don't include it in my accept kind of aspect of multicultural because there's people who don't consider the Wild West of steampunk to be steampunk. Part of that's also because there's actually another term called Edison Age to reference the steampunk of sorts, the industrial age push and the historical fiction based on out of the U.S. Based on Edison and his technology and all, even though we know it wasn't necessarily Edison starting it. But
It's
It's one of those
basically
things.
American steampunk.
Well, one of the big differences actually, if you, again, back in the literature, and I reference the literature a lot because that's where a lot of the origins in steampunk come from. So steampunk literature used Victorian England and Europe as their nations of power and all, where it was Victorian England protecting itself from foreign nations. The dominance attempts, the warring attempts, etc. In Edison Aid, the difference is that it was the U.S. protecting themselves internally from the Native Americans. So again, that's another reason why we tend to see in Wild West stuff a detraction of the Native American involvement in there because we don't want to piss Native Americans off. It was already bad enough how we treated them. We don't want to continue an idea. So it's there, and unfortunately we should include them in some way because there is influence there, and they have the right to be involved with it too. But that's one of the things that we see on that. Now there are some current writings that involve kind of the Wild West Native Americans aren't really in there, mainly because, as I pointed out before, with imperialism, it just didn't really fit the plot. They're not involved, there's no reason to have them. But they're very Wild West kind of thing. I'm trying to think, there's a really popular Western author, I'm blanking on his name. Anybody follow Westerns? Louis L'Amour, is that it? Yes. Some of the I think honestly Louis L'Amour could be like one of the major influences too for some of the authors because it's very much along those lines, but just with a steampunk kind of gadgetry and technology and whatnot involved. That's about it.
Any other questions? Questions, comments, concerns? Feedback from the panel?
Cool, except for a few people who look like Chris. I'm not that bad anyway. Okay. But yeah, so yeah, it's true. So that's steampunk. That's multicultural steampunk, and since some of you might not have been around for it yesterday, if you have just general questions on steampunk, feel free to ask because I'll answer, and I'll just keep talking until they say I have to leave. But I've got Jimmy in here, so unless he tells me I have to leave.
Your place of panelists.
Yeah, exactly. So, are there any other just general questions even? So, all right. As far as where to get materials, fabric stores, Joann's usually has a really good selection on a lot of bricades, Chinese bricades. Usually in the same section. Yeah, and usually in the same section they have the sari material as well. And then they have a wonderful selection for batiks. As far as, I'd probably say Joann's honestly has the largest variety of that you will see typically carried in fabric stores.
Can you confirm that?
Just comparing it to like Hancock's and some of the others, they'll have maybe 4 bolts, while Joann's has 10 or more. Sometimes even in 2 different sections, depending on. And then, now what I haven't seen, maybe Rick can help out with that, is some of the African fabrics. Especially because you get the very geometric design pattern into it and all. I haven't really seen anybody carry anything along those lines.
Japan usually gets a small collection with their summer collection. That's it.
Yeah. Now there are
thrift stores.
Yeah, thrift stores. Honestly, thrift stores are wonderful for everything, including cultural outfits, especially some of the little Chinese ones and everything.
Little Chinese shirts.
You see them a lot.
You see those quite a bit.
Especially
I,
the ones.
on 2 separate occasions in Austin, found really cool wrap skirts. I also one time found some wrap pants that I love, but got rid of, so I'll have to make them into a skirt or something.
There's a couple fabric or a couple pattern retailers as well. I always blank on the name of this one, and then somebody helps me out with it.
Folkware?
Yes, Folkware. Folkware.com,
Yep.
I want to say. You can go there and get patterns of a lot of different culture, traditional clothing, including the Wild West, and pioneer kind of stylings, and some old English, German, etc. kind of stylings and all. But you'll find them for Chinese, Japanese outfits. I think they even have some Korean ones, which are really cool too. So,
Steampunk theaters.
that's a great way. Also, the Society for Creative Anachronism, SCA. They tend, again, they're anal. Oh, Jimmy's actually finally saying something. So that's another resource. Go look up SCA and look into their patterns. They're very anal about getting it historically accurate, and they'll have patterns available a lot of times too. Cool. All right.
If you come up with a question later after the con, you can go to our Facebook, the Brass Apple, and we are more than happy to answer any of your questions, concerns, comments, and reviews.
Yes, and we will try to have some information posting up there regularly about some of this stuff too.
Yay.
All right. Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming, guys. Yay.